Okay, so good morning, everyone. So welcome to the seminar. So we're going to start. So as usual, we are on a webinar mode. So people online, you can report any technical issue in the chat. And please use the Q&A tab for asking any questions. And with that, thanks very much, Louise, for introducing today's speaker.
Hi, thank you for being here today. Thank you, Mathieu. I'm really happy to introduce Mathieu. He's a researcher at the Center of Research for Animal Cognition in Toulouse. He studies insect cognition, and most recently he has focused on bumblebees, honeybees, and also hornets cognition related to navigation, but also nutrition. And also he's interested in the effect of pollution on cognition. So he just came back from a field trip to Fukushima. And he uses a combination of experiments, behavioral experiments, and computer simulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. So yeah, okay. This is for you. Okay. Thank you, Louise. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the organization. It's very neat. I'm very happy to be here today in a famous department. And I'm going to indeed talk about animal behavior and bee cognition, very specific, detailed studies about bee intelligence. And my aim today is to try to convince you that these detailed mechanistic analysis of insect behavior can have broader implication for broader scale processes that you may study in ecology and evolution. That's my aim. All right. Okay. All right. So cognition, what it is? Cognition is a trait that is shared by virtually every animal on Earth. Now there is a consensus in the community. What is cognition? In a broad sense, it's the ability of animals to sense stimuli, to process the stimuli, and potentially to reuse the stimuli to solve a problem. So it's probably an adaptive trait. And you can see it's everywhere in the animal kingdom. So you have fish, birds that make collective decisions. You have little insects that build giant buildings. You have vertebrates that solve puzzling problems, and animals that have tools, etc., etc. You can even see wasps that can recognize the face of each other. So yeah, studying cognition has been a long journey in ethological research. And in fact, insects, the smallest animals, have been central, have been key to the understanding of these processes. And the insects have attracted the eyes of the naturalists, famous guys like Darwin, Fabre, Romanes, Lubbock. Read Lubbock, it's very, very neat. Anyway, more recent people like von Frisch, maybe you know this guy, or Nico Tinbergen, they got a Nobel Prize for the development of my science, ethology. And they focused on insects because insects were everywhere at the time, and they are tiny and supposedly simple. So if you study simple organisms, you study simple cognition. That's the idea. And today, we have about a century of research on insect cognition, insect intelligence. And mostly this research is done on bees, okay? Honeybees on top and bumblebees at the bottom, because they are everywhere, and these are insects that constantly want food. And they go outside to get food. And so you can walk outside and look at them, how they manage and what kind of problems they solve to get this food. So they are very practical animals to work with. And as you can see, at the very beginning, so a century ago, people were asking the question, do insects see colors? Do they perceive sound? A very basic low-level question. And nowadays, we are very seriously talking about concept learning, symbolic communication, numerosity, cultural transmission. And the top level question at the moment, the debate is, do insects have emotions and consciousness? Okay? So it can seem quite weird to you, but for you to understand what's happening in our community, here's an illustration of a famous paper 2 years ago that claims to demonstrate in bumblebees the existence of social learning, cultural transmission, and tool use. I'll explain to you. So these are bumblebees, big bees that you can work with in the lab. And my colleagues, my English colleagues, taught these bumblebees to roll a ball to get a sugar solution, sugar reward, like you would do with a rat. Okay? And so it's fun to do. It does many tricks. First, you have to train the bee with a fake bee. And you can roll the ball with a magnet under the platform, etc., etc. When the bee managed to do this, you can put this experienced bee with a naive bee that doesn't know the behavior. And in contact with the experienced bee, the naive bee will learn to roll the ball to get a reward. So that's social learning. If you do that on many generations, a long chain of social learning, then you have cultural transmission. And if you give a new task to the observer, then the one he has observed, for instance, there is a black ball, or there is a ball that is too close to the hole than in the task that she has been trained, then this observer can innovate, ameliorate the behavior that has been observed. Okay? So that's all in the lab, very artificial and very top-down. We have a psychological hypothesis from human psychology, and then we apply it to insects. So is it really real? We don't know, but at least it's interesting. At least I find it interesting. What is even more interesting, if you consider the size of the brain of these animals. Okay, you have a colored-coded brain reconstruction of the brain of a bee, and their brain is organized pretty much like ours. So it's made of neurons. There are zones that treat the visual information, olfactory information, and the big stuff in the middle are called the mushroom bodies. This is where all this information is integrated to produce memory. And it is puzzling that all these animals with so tiny brain manage to do all these things, at least apparently. So that's a question. Why bees are so intelligent? So following the advice of my student, I asked the famous AI, and I was happy to see that there was an answer. So bees are considered to be intelligent because they exhibit a range of sophisticated behavior and cognitive abilities that are essential for their survival and success as a species. So at least it is sound, but it fails quite short. I mean, this is not a real explanation. And I was glad to see that yesterday. A few years ago, we argued that maybe it's more complex than this. We think that most of the bee intelligence, the things that we see in the lab in artificial conditions, are emergent behavior because these bees, to survive, need to forage on flowers. And you all know that. What does it mean for a bee to forage on flowers? Most of bee species live in a nest. Okay? I'm talking about bees, but could be any kind of pollinators, hummingbirds, some monkeys, some bats. Okay? So you live in a nest. You develop in that nest. And then at some point, your goal is to go out, forage for food. The food is in the flowers, nectar or pollen. Each flower produces a very limited amount of these food sources. Therefore, you need to be very efficient and visit maybe thousands of flowers in a trip to fill your stomach or fill your legs with food and feed your colony or your brood. And this, you will do it all day long during the rest of your life. That's basically the aim of these bees. But of course, the environment is complex. As you see here, we have different types of flower patches, big ones, small ones with different types of resources, and can be at large spatial scales. So if you try to think that you're a bee, first thing you will have to do is to leave this nest and try to get some images of the environment to orientate correctly and come back to this nest. So there's potentially lots of spatial and visual memory going on. Then you have to find food, flowers, flower patches. Here as well, you will have to taste the nectar or the pollen and judge whether it's good or bad. You will have to maybe recognize the size, the colors, the shape, the texture of the flowers, etc. So there's lots of learning going on as well. And once you find a good food source, for instance, the red flowers here, as I said, you have to visit hundreds or thousands of flowers per foraging trip. So maybe you have to develop circuits that links these different flower patches. So here again, potentially complex planning or spatial memories going on. And finally, whether you are social or not, you have to deal with the others. So if you are social, maybe you communicate to maximize the foraging efficiency at the colony level. If you are solitary, then you have to avoid potentially competition or fight. So you have to have some sense of what's going on with your competitors or social partners. So I hope I convinced you that potentially foraging for flowers, things we see every day, even here in the campus, is potentially complex, and that's maybe why these bees have this developed brain with many learning and memory abilities. Paradoxically, although of course these ideas are long ago in the literature, we know very little about how bees might do this stuff. And the main reason is that it's very difficult to follow these insects in the field. And I don't know if you try to run behind a bee, you can for a few meters, but then you're lost because they can go very high and very fast. And all the bees look like the same. Okay. So this is when all started for me in my lab a few years ago, when we asked the question, okay, we have bees, how do they move between flowers? What do they do? In fact, we don't know at large spatial scale. And at that time, we were fortunate enough to find this old paper by Charles Darwin. We did many things, as you know, but he did this during 2 summers. He wrote a letter when he explained that in his garden in the south of London, where he spent half of his life, he had bumblebees, so the big bees I showed you before, and these bumblebees, so they were males looking for females, and these males seem to visit the garden always using the same routes, like this. So this is his observation, and then he wanted to test this hypothesis. So as he used to, Charles Darwin made many experiments with his kids. And in this particular case, what he did is he would put a kid at different places in the garden. And so each time the kid would see a bee, would raise the hand, say, there's a bee, and Darwin would know. There's a bee, there's a bee, there's a bee. And this is how he actually produced this track. Yeah. Okay. He had a few tracks in this paper. But in the end of the paper, he said, okay, I cannot solve this question because I am not able to recognize individual bees. Maybe there are many bees. This behavior doesn't exist actually. All right. So, as I said, I was fortunate enough to be at the time in a lab in the UK where they had just developed a device that was dedicated to track bees in the field. So you cannot put GPS on the bee, it's too big. You cannot put pit tags, but you can use radars. And this is radars from the marine, okay, developed by the army, basically. That is very efficient. Actually, is the best solution at the moment to track small flying animals. How it works? So you have one parabola that emits electromagnetic signal, very strong. Don't go in front of the signal. And then part of this signal can be re-emitted by a small antenna. Small antenna is attached to the bee, very light, but big. And so this way, when the radar turns, rotates, you can get the 2D coordinates of the bee that forages in your environment. Of course, you need to use an environment where there is no obstacle, and you cannot really move the radar. So it's a foraging arena of 1 kilometer diameter. Okay. So At that time, so we wanted to test Darwin's hypothesis. So how it worked, we had a field, this is big field. We played with bumblebees. Okay, so I put a bumblebee nest here in this field, and I put artificial flowers. So there was no flower in the field. I cut them all. No natural flowers, otherwise the experiment doesn't work. I put artificial flowers with a bit of plastic with sugar solution. This is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And these flowers were 50 meters apart from each other. So it's long distance for the bee. She cannot see all the flowers at once. Then I put an antenna on the bee and I track the bee. So this is an accelerated trajectory of the bee during this first trip. So you see the bee goes out of the nest, she finds flower 1, flower 5 is next to 1, and flower 2, she did some exploration, go back to 5, which is empty, 1, 5, 2, more exploration, 2 is empty, 5 is empty, 2 is empty, returns to 1, is empty. And after about an hour, the bee will come back to the nest. So in this particular case, we have a bee that flew almost 2 kilometers. So this is this one, I think. She flew 2 kilometers, she found 3 flowers, not the 5. And you see it's messy, there's lots of exploration. In Simon, you can recognize some exploration in there. So these are the tracks of 3 naive bees, you see, similar pattern, it's messy, but they find places. It seems that to learn that there are flowers. And then we left, and at the end of the day, so we left and the bee could forage, and at the end of the day, we came back. So it's 4 hours later. This is the same bee I showed you. So this bee now goes to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 nest in 10 minutes. So là, it was completely clear that something was happening, and that clearly the bees would learn to locate the different flowers, but also to optimize the path between all the flowers. So this spatial, visual learning and optimization. So we are pretty happy with that. All the bees we tested do the same, either they turn in one direction or in the other direction. And this was the start of a long series of experiments where we show that bees develop roots, not just bumblebees, but honeybees, solitary bees do that, hummingbirds do that, bats do that. They solve the same problem. They develop roots, they stick to this root as long as there's food. And this root, we call them trap lines. I think monkeys, some monkeys also do this kind of stuff. So we've done many things. We played with the radar. This is a video of a bee developing a root over 1 day. You see, there's again some repeated pattern, etc., etc. And this allows us now to develop models to try to understand how bees would do that. So this is just a simulation of a very simple model that is the most parsimonious, knowing what we know about the bee brain and their visual and spatial memories. We don't need to assume that these animals have a cognitive map, a sophisticated representation of space to solve this problem. They can just learn vectors between 2 points, okay, and reinforce the probability to reuse these vectors if there is a reward at the end of the vector, and to trial and error to find this pentagon in this case. Of course, this is a very simple case, a pentagon. You can solve the problem, you just turn around. But in most cases, the bees attempt to optimize their path. All right, so it was the first example. We did many other stuff. For instance, how do bees pinpoint these flowers? How do they learn that there is a flower and how they go back there? Again, looking at the old prestigious literature, we can have some answers. This is Nico Tinbergen, also Nobel Prize for the development of ethology. And he's worked quite a lot with birds, but also at the very beginning with insects. This is a wasp, digger wasp, that digs her nest in the sand. Okay, and Tinbergen made the hypothesis that maybe these wasps can find this tiny hole in the sand with visual cues around. So what he did, when the wasp was out, away, he would put confines around the nest, a big landmark. And the wasp will come back to the nest, no problem. And he made the hypothesis that these confines will be the main visual signal that will indicate the nest location to the wasp. So when the wasp was going away again, it would move the cone pines a few centimeters away. And when the wasp would come back, then she would go to the fake nest entrance, because this is the most important visual signal that will indicate the nest location. And then he played with many different things. He put stones with a round shape, or cone pines in a triangular shape, and you see that the wasps can generalize the stimuli, and we prefer the round shape rather than the triangular shape, even though the material was different. Anyway, that's a clear demonstration that these animals use vision, and they are very good at using vision to identify places. So we played as well with this idea, and we pushed it to another spatial scale. Okay. They use vision to pinpoint the nest entrance, which is very small scale. Is one landmark. What happens if the bee has to go through several hundred meters or kilometers? Do they still use vision? If yes, which cues? So we did these experiments a few years ago in south of Spain, because it's nicer, warmer than England. And also because in this particular area, there was no panorama. You see, there is a panorama, a few trees, but the visual resolution of the bees is too poor for them to perceive this panorama. So there's no cue horizontally. However, when you take some height, you see this. These are rice paddies. So the bees that fly have access to all these lines, these quadriatic environments. Again, we use the radars, we put some antennas on the bees, and we just recorded what's happening. And we did that at many, many different moments. What we basically observed, and it was a nice fit with the literature on pigeons and birds, is that the bees at different moments of their life, this is a lurling flight. First time they go away from the nest. This is a search flight when they are already foragers and are looking for a place where they are used to go. In these two cases, you can see that the bees would often follow the line, the path between the rice paddies, in this direction, that direction, or go parallel to this line. This is very much more than expected by chance, when they are naive or when they are experienced. Here, the bee is trying to go to an artificial flower here, and then I remove the artificial flower. You can see the path. She's doing this along the line. She's looking at the line, not at the particular place. And so that means that these animals use widely visual landmarks. And when you think from a 3D perspective, for them, the visual landmarks, the predominant visual landmarks are on the ground. So in this case, they follow roads to forage and to find places and to go back to these places. There's also the issue of communicating. As I said before, the bees will interact between each other when foraging. And again, there's famous research, Karl von Frisch, Nobel Prize as well, because he discovered symbolic communication between honeybees. So for those who don't know this, when a bee goes out, finds a good spot of food, she will come back to the nest, and inside the nest, she would do what we call a dance. So it's a routine, an H-shaped behavior, like this. And this H-shaped behavior indicates to all the other nestmates that are nearby the direction, the location, the precise coordinates of the food source. So in this case, you have in B, you have a bee that found the food source in this direction and A in this direction. And the bees that follow this dance can go out and go straight to this direction. That's the paradigm. But if you followed me just before, I told you the bees rarely go to one point. So we made the hypothesis with Joanna recently that it must be more complex than this. If you have a bee that goes to different places that develop a route or a trap line, what's happening? The theory says you go to one point, but there are many points. So this is a radar track of a bee that has been to 5 different locations before coming back to the nest, and this is the dance that she produces. So here we are opening a new door. What does it mean? Are they communicating the root? Are they communicating the first flower of the root, the last flower, the average point? We're not sure yet. But we started experiments this summer with Johanna. So she has a honeybee nest here, and she trained the honeybees to go to an artificial flowers. She analyzed the denses, and these are the vectors or the end location of the denses. For this flower, it's very much next to the flower, different denses. Then we started to analyze what's happening when you have many flowers. So the bees goes to 5 flowers, she denses, and the endpoints are there. Here, here, outside of my screen, here, 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 here. And we've started to analyze this data. In fact, what emerges from this, that we have bees that dance for the extremities of our arrangement. So it's possible that they dance for a foraging area using an angle, alternating between 2 dances like this. Well, not published yet, and we have lots of data, but might be much more complex than previously assumed. Okay, more experiments. So for now, I was talking about socially foraging bees, but most of the bees forage solitarily. Think of bumblebees that are social animals. They all go on their own way. They don't cooperate, they don't communicate. They tend to compete each other. And all solitary bees, which is the majority of bee species, compete each other for the same flower. They also compete with butterflies and wasps and flies, etc., etc. So a few years ago, again, we started to dig into this question: how do bees move between flowers when there's many bees? So here we were limited by the fact that the radars cannot track many bees at the same time. The resolution power of the radars is too small, so we lose track of the different bees. What we had to do here is to build a giant tent. This is a quarter of a football ground, okay, a big tent, in which we released bees, and we had flowers that were artificial flowers that were a bit more sophisticated. They were automated pumps, nectar pumps. Each time a bee would come to the flower will activate, deliver some nectar, and take a picture so that we can recognize the bee. And we let this system run for 1 week. All the bees could come and forage or fight, whatever. Christian Pasquaretta is a specialist of network analysis, spatial network analysis. And today is a lecturer working with sport data. He's working with the Stade Toulousain. So yes, he's got all the Stade Toulousain data, doing network. At the time, he was doing the same with bees. So he mapped back the spatial networks of all the bees in these colonies for 1 week. And he did some stats that I don't understand. And he basically computed a modularity index based on this network. What does it mean? Is that if the modularity is 0, all the bees always go on the same flower. If modularity is 15 or more, it means that the bees all go in different flowers. So without touching nothing, through time, you observe that in these experiments, the modularity index is almost always above chance. It means that the bees self-organize to visit different flowers. It makes sense, because if they do this, they increase their foraging efficiency at the individual level, but also at the collective level. You increase the nectar yield like this. So how does it work? We are not sure, but we have some insight of the flowers. So these are the flowers. This is the top of this flower here. And as I say, we took videos or pictures. And sometimes the bees will encounter on flowers. Here we have 2 bees feeding together peacefully on the flower. But in most of the cases, when bees encounter each other, there is one bee that will expulse the other, eject the other, without fighting. They just eject the other. And it may be that this behavior, this punishment, or this negative interaction, plays a role in the learning of the roots of the bees, and will discourage some bees to come back to this place. Okay? If I come back to the types of models that I presented to you before at the individual level, then we can have populations of bees. So here is the simulation with just 2 bees, population of 2 bees, not a lot. And we have the same learning process as before. If you go to a place, there is a reward, you go back to this place, and then you develop a route. But if you go to a place and you don't have a reward because there is another bee that ejects you, or because the flower is empty, then you have a lower tendency to come back. And this, if you play with the model and the parameters, will lead to the emergence of partitioning between these. So here is a case where there is no negative reinforcement, just positive reinforcement. You go, you come back if there is a reward. Here is a case where there is only negative reinforcement, and here you have both positive and negative reinforcement. And you see that this is the most powerful approach to get spatial partitioning at the middle level, colony level, if you want, without planning in advance, require complex cognition. So we don't know if it's true or not, at least we have a mechanism that we can test experimentally. All right. So I could multiply the examples like this, but there is a point here. The point is that from these experiments, bees do not move randomly. There's no way. They don't move randomly, they don't search randomly, they don't exploit food sources randomly, and they don't choose to link flowers randomly. They have learning, they have memory, they follow rules, and we can, to some extent, predict their behavior in an environment. And the idea here is that maybe if we can predict their behavior, we can also predict the transfer of pollen that they manage to do when they fly between flowers. And therefore, if we predict the transfer of pollen, the movement patterns of pollen in the middle, we might be able to contribute a little bit to pollination ecology. Because at the moment, the main paradigm, say the main paradigm, not the only paradigm, is that in most models, bees move randomly. That's not true. So if you take this into account, then you can make new hypotheses. Bee movement predict plant mating patterns. For instance, as I said before, there's two types of bees. Most of the bees are solo foragers, like bumblebees. They go, they learn a route, they invest in their route, and they avoid competition. And you have mass foragers, like honeybees. They go, they communicate the location, and they all go at the same place. If you consider now the trajectories of these bees, theoretical trajectories of these bees between flowers, then you can make predictions for pollination. For instance, if you are a bumblebee, if you consider two bumblebees, they will develop two distinct routes like this. And then these two plants here that are next to each other may not be pollinated just because they are on the route of two different bees. It's an hypothesis. If this is true, then it has implications in terms of mating distance, on mate diversity, and it changes the prediction that you make than if the bees move randomly. If you have mass foragers like honeybees, then you won't have routes, but you will have massive amount of bees at the same place at the same moment. And then all your plants will be pollinated here, but they will also be self-pollinated, which can be good or bad, depending on the species. So there's potentially a lot of things to test. So this is ongoing work and wild speculation. But at the moment, we are really working hard in developing the simulation aspects of these bee movements and also the experimental aspects. I will give you a few words. Simulations. We've just started with toy models to see what we could do. So this is the work of a PhD student, Anna Moran, who wanted to develop a model that would replicate the search behavior of bees. This doesn't exist in the literature. And she said, okay, what would be interesting in this model is to use the data from the literature, data from radar, calibrate the model, but also to use what we know about the cognition of these animals. Basically, they are very visual. So they detect flowers from a distance. And this is not a random distance. This is the resolution of their eye. You can have the same reasoning with the smell. They detect flowers from a distance. So there's an area of detection. And if you take into account the area of detection, that you make new prediction about flower discovery and potentially pollination. So for instance, she came up with this concept, the masking effect. The idea that some flowers may mask other flowers around. And therefore, these masked flowers will less be visited by the bees. So simple case, you have a nest, two identical flowers or plants at equidistance of the nest. The bees explores. If it's random exploration, you have the same probability to visit the two plants. Now, if you had a flower just midway the nest and that flower here, You run the model. This flower, which is closest to the nest, will be highly visited. But this flower, which is equidistant to this one, could be less visited than this one because she is masked perceptually by the first flower. Theoretical concept, of course. But she played with her model. She made some predictions. So this is a simulation of a bee searching. And she made some predictions about the number of flowers that will be discovered in an environment depending on the density of flowers. If you have just a random search with no perception, so the bee can go anywhere, doesn't perceive, she doesn't understand what's happening, the more flowers there is in the environment, the more flowers will be discovered. Diffusion. If now you had the perception range, you have something that is maybe counterintuitive. The more flowers there are, the more they will be discovered, up to a point where less flowers will be discovered because there's too many flowers and they are perceptually masked by the other flowers. So whether it's true or not, we don't know. We have predictions, we will test them. But if it's true, then it has very strong implications for pollination. For deciding to put hives in a crop meadow, for instance, there's probably a critical number of bees to add, or maybe to design the meadow, to have a critical number of flowers in the middle. So this is work that we started with Louise and Julian, another PhD student, who again is playing with models inspired from our radar data. And she started to ask the question of whether different types of bees would be more efficient in finding flowers than other types of bees. I talked to you before about bumblebees and honeybees that have two different strategies. And it's well known in pollination ecology that these two species, or these two groups of species, are complementary. If you have only honeybees in a meadow, usually the crop yield is lower than if you have the two species. They are complementary. But we don't really know the mechanisms of this complementarity. So Julian played with her model, and basically here she made vary the probability of communicating, of recruiting other bees to the food that has been located. And this is a metric of root quality, which is dependent of the number of flowers that have been discovered. So this is high, this means that the bees discover the flowers. This is low, they don't discover the flowers. Again, what we can see is that here, in this area, when the flowers are far from the nest or difficult to locate, it pays very, very much to be social, to recruit, because there is social information transfer. You tell the other, here there is food, and then you increase the probability to discover food. However, in these cases here, it seems that there is no advantage, and even maybe a disadvantage to be social. It's better to go in every direction to explore, and every individual do his own stuff. And what is interesting with this toy model is that it fits the verbal model, the theory, the old theory that says that honeybees, the one that recruits like crazy, have evolved in tropical forests in India, basically. Tropical forests where food is scarce, blooming very fastly and hidden. Whereas this solo foraging mostly has evolved in our types of area where you can think about meadows where there's little flowers everywhere. And in this case, it's counterproductive to recruit and all go to one flower. Again, this is just prediction and speculation at the moment. So we have these predictions, and the aim now is to test this prediction experimentally. So for this, we are still working on a research facility in Toulouse. We are developing, again, with the famous radars. We are developing what we call the robo plants. So this is, we do experiments in fields where there's no flowers. There's plants, but no flowers. There's grass. And in the middle of the grass, we will put these devices that are automated plants in which the bees can learn to go. They can be recognized with camera video, and then can be programmed so that the door opens to only some bees and not to other bees. And the bees can get a reward from these flowers for now the nectar. So these robot plants send data on a server. And also we have the trajectories of the bees. And of course, we need a big field. So if you want to make experiments with bees, come to Toulouse. the final aim, again, we started to work on this. So first is to validate our models with robotic, artificial landscape, etc. But then we have the one possibility to test our models on real plant populations. And we have access to this data set, this unique data set that has been led by Nick Barton on snapdragons. So these are plants very common in the Pyrenees. And they are populations that are studied by colleagues since 15 years now. And in this population, they have mapped the 3D location of every single individual for 15 years, and they have the genotype of all these individuals. The idea, in the longer term, is to run our models in this population and see whether we can reconstruct the mating patterns of the plant on the longer term. But we have the access to this data. This is France. Okay, last part of my talk is again another tweak. As I said, bees are smart, are cognitive capacities, and this is all linked to foraging. And these cognitive capacities, in fact, can also help to assess the quality of an environment and maybe take new conservation measures. Again, we are just starting. But a few years ago, we came up with this concept that you all know: pollinators decline, it's bad, and pollination is in danger, etc., etc. It's dramatic, and it's true. But these are not the only species declining. But of course, you see them declining; it's obvious, and now we have good causes for it. The idea here is that these animals are maybe more susceptible to environmental stressors than some others, because they have a tiny brain, and this brain is very capable, so it produces many cognitive capacities on which they rely exclusively to get food. And in fact, maybe, perhaps, every neuron in this brain is useful, which is a priori not the case in our brain. There's many repetitions, so if we lose neurons, then we still have the pathway. In their brain, maybe it's so compact, so optimized that any small stressors can affect the brain and key cognitive ability. And this is well known now. Since 10 years, we have evidence that, for instance, pesticides don't kill bees, but impairs their cognitive abilities. And that has been demonstrated by colleagues in Avignon 10 years ago with the neonicotinoid pesticides. So these famous molecules that are neurotoxins that have been sprayed or put in seeds to kill aphids, which are insects. So these have been designed to destroy the brain of insects. But of course, these neonicotinoids are everywhere in the environment now, and they are in the flowers of the crops that are treated in very small quantities. But even very small quantities, that means that these insects feed on neurotoxins and at quantities that don't kill them. They don't die. But you all know that bees don't do very well. So what has been found in these kind of studies is that these pesticides have sublethal effects that just impair the normal behavior of bees. And sometimes it can have very dramatic consequences. In this case here, the bees don't come back to the nest. So how they did that? They had a honeybee colony fitted with receptors, RFID readers. And on the bees, you put RFIDs, so it's a little chip with a numerical barcode, numerical identity. So each time the bee will go out of the nest, the machine will beep. And each time she will come back, it will beep, and we will get the data. We know exactly when she came back or what she. So the colleagues took some bees that were foraging in the environment, gave them a drop of neonicotinoid or a drop of water. And then they brought them some 100 meters away, released them, and the bees had to come back to the nest. This is the time it took for these bees to come back to the nest, the probability. So the control bees that had water were going to the nest at 80%, more or less. The bees that had once neonicotinoid came back to the nest 10% less. And if you do the same experiment, but you bring the bees in unfamiliar sites, places where they probably never have been, the effect is much stronger. So even the control bees get lost, but the treated bees are, okay, you lose a lot. But that's a demonstration that these stressors affect the brain, don't kill the bees, but after some time, the colony collapses. So, okay, this is all the focus has been on these neonicotinoids. In fact, the environment is completely polluted. There's many other types of stressors. So a few years ago, we started with pollutants that are not very well studied, like heavy metals. Do heavy metal pollution affect the bee brain? For this, we went to the most polluted place in France, which is a former gold mine near Carcassonne. Gold mine heavily polluted with arsenic and other heavy metals. And we put some hives in the gold mine, a bit further away, further away, further away. We did cognitive tests. This time we didn't use the fancy capture, recapture, release experiments, but we brought back the bees in the lab, put them in a tube, and test their ability to learn an odor. So we display an odor, and at the same time, we give some sugar solution to the bee. We do that many times, and after some time, we just display the odor without sugar solution. If the bee understood, she extends the tongue. Okay, that's normal bee. And to cut a long story short, here we have the learning data of bees that were born in the mine. You see, there's a huge variation from bees that don't learn to bees that learn. And these are the learning data of bees 10 kilometers away from the mine. So there's an effect of learning of the exposure of heavy metals. Then we played with Renaud from ISEM. We had these bees, we dissected them, we scanned their brain. We developed some artificial intelligence to help us segregate the different brain areas. And we came with these nice images with 3D volumes of the brains of the bees. We analyzed these volumes to really see if there was morphological damages of these brains. And basically what we could find here is that one brain area in particular is affected. This is the mine site. This is 10 kilometers away from the mine site. These are the antennal lobe. Antennal lobe are these purple areas here, just below the antenna. And the antenna are the nose of the bee. So it makes sense that this olfactory learning is impaired by an impairment of the antennal lobe that are, in this case, smaller for bees that are in the mine than bees that are outside the mine. That means that bees that fed heavy metals had a developmental impairment. All right, so there's many stressors. You know, we can make the same story for the stressors. The point is that cognition is a good metric to identify these stressors. And in fact, the point at the moment is, okay, bees are malnourished, they are exposed to pollutants, but in fact, much more complex than this. So recently, we've developed automated cognitive tests. Again, this is a Y maze that is autonomous, let's say. So the bees can come in the Y maze, recognized by the Y maze. The bee then has to solve a problem, a visual problem, and she can learn through trials and error to solve this problem. And with this, you can have a population of bees and draw learning curves. Okay, and you can tell in this population, the bees are much better at learning my task than in another population. The aim of this is to go in the field, like in the gold mine, put these automated Y maze, cognitive measure, if you want, and to see if an environment is good for bees or not. And because bees are sentinel species, then you can expand it to many other insects. So this is our attempt 2 weeks ago. We went to Fukushima, where we know it's not very safe. This is where there has been the nuclear accident, and we put many of our devices there, and we left, and we waited for what was happening. So this is the new situation. And unfortunately for us, at that time of the year, there's no bees. We have no data, but we have hornets. There's lots of hornets. And you can see hornets come in our devices. They get tested, and we have some learning data of hornets in the different sites. So we come back next year. Right, I conclude. All right, the point of this talk is that insects are very good models to study cognition. In particular, bees have a very rich cognitive repertoire. And in cognition research, they are actually considered as miniature apes. So they can do lots of impressive stuff. They have a simple brain, smaller than us, and they are therefore people with better understanding cognition and the evolution of cognition. I'm trying to make sense of this cognition that is found in the lab outside by looking at their movement. And while doing this, I think it's realistic to say that this very mechanistic detailed research on bee behavior can help gaining some insights on broader scale phenomena. I talked to you about pollination ecology, but also probably conservation if our devices work and give good results. All right, I thank all the collaborators. Thank you for your attention. Ça marche pas.
Thank you, Mathieu. Questions? Or the chats?
I was really interested by the prospect of actually testing if the bees' behavior have an effect on the mating patterns of plants. So do you have initial results about that? And can you do actually this experiment at a small scale as well, or or replicate that? Because I guess you could get the seed set or like that, depending on the. You could manipulate the spatial distribution of plants as well to see.
Yeah, this is exactly the plan. We have not tried at the moment. So we are really focused on having a good model of bee movement because there is very few data. So we are generating slowly the data, but within the next few years, the plan is to apply this model to generate hypotheses about pollination. The first step will be probably to use our robotic plants and maybe use powders, pollen-like powders, and we map the movement of this fake pollen on the plants. And then once we are happy with that, we go to the natural plants. So we can indeed manipulate in our big field with our potted plants and check for crop yield. But this is not the first step. For now, we need good production.
Okay.
And at small spatial scale, you can, but what we know at very small spatial scales, within a patch, the bees tend to move from nearest neighbor to nearest neighbor plants. So it's less counterintuitive. It's more like random at very small spatial scale. They develop roots at larger spatial scale.
Okay.
Thanks very much for this very interesting talk. So I just had a question regarding your experiment where you showed that the dance of the bee could perhaps be congruent with showing more an area. So what if now you're more like in a field with these flowers a bit everywhere, and you also have like spatial heterogeneity in where you can find plants with most nectar and more flowers? Do you think it could be the case that not only it would the dance could lead to a spatial area, but perhaps to the area in the environment where there's the highest level of resource? Is that possible?
Well, it's not tested directly, but what we know is that these bees make collective decisions. So you have one bee that would dance, indicate one point, recruit more bees. The bees will come back with their own judgment, dance or not. And so you can have an social amplification of all the bees dancing for one point, or some bees will tap into the others to stop. No, we don't really understand what's happening in their mind, but there is a stop signal that inhibits the dance of some of the bees. So there's a collective decision. What we know about collective decision in this kind of animals is that most of the cases it goes towards the optimal. So if there is a very highly rewarding spot in the environment, it will be found by the collectivity.
Do you know some plant traits like the number of flowers produced by plants or the size of the plant can also be linked to this dance direction?
Well, the size of the plant, the number of flowers is an attractive cue. So you will you enlarge the visual area of your plant, so you will attract more likely the bees, but then they will make their own decision whether it's good or not. It's just tricky.
I was just wondering, so you mentioned that bees can recognize their faces. First, I was curious to know how this was tested, and then if individual recognition can influence whether or not the recruitment will be more efficient, or if this has an effect.
Not bees. There's one species of wasp, paper wasps. They recognize their face. So they have different faces. They have masks, black masks on the faces, black dots, and not every face is similar. They're all dissimilar. They live in small communities, like 20 individual maximum. They are all queens, and they build a nest together, but then they fight. And there is one dominant queen. And the trick is to understand that this is the dominant queen. So they fight, and at first sometimes they don't fight anymore, and there's one dominant. Second one. This is for hierarchical purpose. Bees, social insects in general, don't recognize each other. Otherwise, it would be a mess because they live in societies with diverse genetic patrimonies. So they are not all clones. And their cooperation is very much based on altruism. So if you have closer genome than to mine, I will cooperate with you. But if they could know that, there will be subgroups of bees in the population that will cooperate, and there will be conflicts, and the whole colony will collapse. So we think that non-individual recognition has evolved as a purpose to stabilize the society.
You showed that it's possible for bees, like in terms of how they mitigate social competition, that sometimes they tolerate others on a flower, and sometimes they kick each other out. Do you have any idea of like what factors modulate that potential tolerance versus non-tolerance?
It's the amount of food that is available in the flower, the plant, or the cups, just cups. When there's not enough food for two, then there's a fight.
It's always the second one arriving that kicks out the first one, or can they resist?
This we don't know really. There's two hypotheses. First, you have a diversity of size, of body sizes in these bumblebees. For instance, some bees can be twice or three times the size of others. So it seems that the big ones are more dominant. But also it seems that experience plays a role. So if you have invested 5 days already to develop a route between 10 flowers, and if you see another guy, you will be more motivated to experience it than if it's the first time you come to this flower. At least this is how I see it.
So it's your speculation, but it's not yet.
No, speculation.
Okay, thank you.
Other question in the chat?
To other social insects, are bees have higher cognitive abilities, or is it the same?
Very few species have been studied for cognition. Bees are model species since the beginning, with Darwin. So we know them very well, we can see them very well, etc., etc. And we know that now there's clear evidence that individually they are very good, very visual, etc. Now, insects are much less studied, and for cognitive abilities are much less studied. The main studies that have been made are for navigation. So desert ants go for kilometers in the desert and come back to their nest. This is amazing how they do that. But only in this context. Now, what we just said about wasps, there's this single species of wasp that have become a model species, and they seem to do crazy stuff. Maybe they have a theory of mind. Theory of mind is the ability to know that you are in a social group and you can read in the intentions of the others. That's the debate at the moment. But just because this is a model species for one lab, but for other insects, we don't know much.
the community abilities of an insect by, for example, the weight, body size, or is it something that exists in the literature, or it's not?
Yes, it's very debated, the correlation between brain morphology, brain size, and cognitive abilities. But indeed, it has been done. And there's no proof that it's a good way to do, but you have the central brain part in the insect brain. The mushroom bodies are larger in these, basically, Hymenoptera. And we think this is related to their ability to navigate and to nourish a colony, a very big colony. So they have to learn many things. But there's no demonstration that this is true.
Okay, thanks.
I had a related question because I think a lot of insects, when they forage, are actually looking for very rare resources, like not only flowers, but like fruit flies when they look for a specific host, or the butterflies that look for a very specific host plant, and so have complex behavior in terms of navigating in space and identifying something very precise. So I was wondering whether we had any expectation about whether the cognitive ability would be different. I know that Frédéric Méry had also this experiment on memory and in Drosophila as well. So can we really say that because they're social, these are more clever, or is it just that we don't know the others?
I think it's just a matter of people looking at it, particularly in this species, and we discover many things. But it's true that the things we've discovered in bees have been rediscovered in Drosophila. It's much smaller, has no brain, really. But they do the same. They do social learning. They seem to be cultural traits that evolve in this population. Just less spectacular. What is spectacular with these social insects is that they, all day long they do their stuff. Drosophila, they
So we have a question online by Samuel Boff, and we're just going to read it. So do you intend to make exchange experiments from bees from different quality environments to test learning abilities?
Yes, that's one idea. So we can, with our experimental farm, the robotic plants, whatever, we can manipulate the environment. So we can construct very simple environment with few resources all at the same place, for instance, with no competition. But we could also simulate or emulate much more challenging environments where, for instance, food is there only between 10 and 11 in the morning, and then it's there in the afternoon and there, and you have many competitors. And we could test different species in these different environments. We could also test populations of bees that we know are submitted to natural selections. So the bumblebees from south of France are not the same as the same species bumblebees in north of France, evolving in different environments. And see how they react to that. That's one way to do. There's also a second part of this second answer, is that we think there is an ontology. So the bees learn to learn. So if they start foraging in a complex environment, we think it would set their behavior for the rest of their life. And they learn at the very beginning to learn and search a lot. They will learn and search a lot, even if it's obvious that the food is there. Because there is changes in the brain.
Okay. So thank you again.